Hi everyone, in this how-to guide I am going to be showing you how to stitch our masterpieces, the Woolies. And this video relates to the 4 newest additions to our range. Those are Steadfast, Temerity, the 2 smaller ones, and then this one, Sovereign of the Sea, and also the Bay of Biscay. And these ones are stitched slightly differently from the bigger ones, which are Nautilus and Calypso. So if you're stitching Nautilus and Calypso, then please refer to the other how-to video on those. And if you've already stitched them, make sure you just watch a bit of this video as well, because they are stitched slightly differently because they're on a different size canvas. So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through a few different things. I'm first going to show you, if you're using a frame, how to mount your piece up onto a frame. And that will apply across any of these, but also any of our other kits. So I'm going to show you that bit first. Then I'm going to talk you through what is in the kit, the contents of the kit. I'm then going to show you a little bit on each of the designs and just point out on each of the designs different stitch directions, kind of how we're adding ropes, things like that. And I'm going to end just on Sovereign of the Sea, demoing how you do the stitching. Below the video, we're going to put a little timestamp so you'll be able to see what bits are happening when in each section of the video, and so you can refer just to the bit that relates to the kit you're doing. And this video is going to be detailed, but we want to make sure you've got loads of information so you can just enjoy the process of stitching. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. So the first thing I'm going to show you is how to put the canvas onto a frame. Now I am using an LBZ Easy Clip frame, and I also have here an LBZ Twizzler. These are what I recommend. These are what I use for all my tapestry stitching. We have them in the shop. We stock 2 sizes. I've got the larger size here. I really recommend these ones because they're easy to use, easy to clip into. The reason, firstly, just in case you don't know whether to stitch on a frame or not, if you stitch on a frame, it is much easier to maintain the tension. And whilst you are working on a coated canvas, which maintains its structure quite well, because the Woolies end up using longer stitches, if you're working loose, you're more likely to end up pulling the canvas in a bit too tight and shrinking down the overall design, struggling then at the end to be able to stretch it out. So personally, I find it much easier to work on a frame because it means, number one, I don't worry about the tension as I'm stitching. I know that the frame is doing the job of maintaining the tension of the canvas. But secondly, I also personally find it much easier to work on a frame. I feel like my hands almost claw up a bit if I'm holding a loose canvas. I find it personally much easier. So I'm going to show you how to mount up on one of these. If you're not going to use a frame, then you can just skip this section. So firstly, what's in your box? In your box, you'll have 2 large sticks, each with clips on them, 2 shorter sticks like these, a little bag of bolts, and then you will have also an instructions guide on how to set it up. Now I'm just going to show you how to set it up here without needing that. So all I'm doing is I'm going to clip these clips onto the end of my frame. Doesn't matter which way round you put them on. Personally, I'm just going to clip one side on and not going to clip both sides on. I'm then going to get out my canvas, and because later in the video I'm going to be showing you how to stitch sections of Sovereign of the Sea, I'm going to be using my Sovereign of the Sea canvas. So my canvas here is a bit smaller than my frame. So probably if I was working this one, normally what I would actually end up doing is using the slightly shorter frame. This is a 24 by 9 inch frame. I would tend actually on a smaller canvas size like this to work on an 18 by 9. And that's the other size we stock. Now there is no reason for that other than it's slightly smaller, slightly easier to carry around. But if you only want one frame, people tend to buy the bigger size because it means you're likely to be able to fit every canvas you're working with onto the frame. So all I'm going to do is open up my design. You can see what I'm going to end up doing is working my design horizontally. So I'm going to kind of work across and roll across. That is just because it's such a long design. If I tried to work vertically, I would need such a big frame. It would be completely unwieldy. So I'm going to first up, I've got one side here mounted, take my clips off. Now, if you ever find your canvas is slightly too big for the frame you've got, you absolutely can trim down your canvas. And you really only need sort of 10 holes, you need an inch to be able to make your canvas mounted after. So if you do cut it down, that's okay. Try retain as much of the loose canvas as you can, because you can always cut it down later, but you obviously can't add it back. So it doesn't matter which way you attach your canvas here to the frame. What I'm going to do is go down to the bottom, because I just want to make it as straight as possible. So I'm going to pull my edge of my frame along, and I wrap my piece round so I feel like the holes are kind of all in a straight line, and then I clip my clip into place like this. And then this one has multiple clips, so I'm going to then put my next one on. Again, keeping it straight as possible. Next one on, and then my final one. And you'll see if you've used cat frames before and you've ever done ones, a lot of people, traditionally the frames used were stitch-on ones. This is so much easier. So, I've got one side done. What I'm just going to do is just clip on my other side before I attach my frame together. It's much easier to do this before the frame is attached. Take the clips off. And again, I'm going to wrap it up and round. And again, what I want to do is just try. I'm going to take it right down to the end, because I'm going to want to make sure when I end up having this long that my canvas is straight. And part of the reason I took mine right to the end before is because I knew that was a kind of nice straight position. So I'm taking it right down to the end. Give myself a bit of canvas. Get my lines straight with the holes. Here we go. And then the first clip goes in. So take it right to the end. First clip goes in once I'm straight. And take your time over this. Once you've got it mounted up, you're not going to be taking it off again. You could be working a canvas for, over a year. It's worth getting it right. I've done this a lot of times, so I'm quite quick at sort of straightening it up. If you haven't done it that often, you might want to take a bit more time over it. And one more. This one went slightly on a wonk. Put it slightly in, slightly further. Okay, so I've got both my sides attached. Now I'm just going to clip and push this in. So you see it's straight along the bottom, and I'm going to roll. Rolling until it's tight, and I can see the section where I'm going to want to start my stitching. Now I get my bolts, so I'm going to just cut this open and just show you how to put the bolts on. So you'll see the way I've wound mine is so that the canvas is actually sort of on the lower half. Rather than sitting forward, it's sitting at the bottom. As you roll it, you'll have two choices. You either roll it so the canvas is at the front or at the back. I personally prefer this way. It's the way my granny kind of showed me how to do it. And part of the reason she always said to do it that way is because if you put it in your bag or something, you have a slight level of protection on the stitching. Whereas if the stitching's sat forward, when you've got this rolled edge, that's always your front side of your stitching. Whereas if you have it this way, that's always the back side. So you have a bit of protection. it really doesn't make a difference, and there isn't particularly a right way or wrong way. Likewise with where your wing nuts end up going, whether you have this bar on the front or the back doesn't matter. So don't worry too much about how you're setting up. But what you're going to do is I'm going to put my bolt from the back here, and I'm going to just loosely attach in my wing nut. And I'll just do the same at this bottom end. Right side, and attach in my wing nut. Likewise here, both bolts. And loosely put my wing nut in. So these are all really loosely attached in now. And what you want to do is you then need to twist them in tight enough so on this bolt side it pushes the square section into the wood, and that's how you make your frame really tight. Now I'm quite strong and I cannot do this alone by my hand. It just won't pull it all the way in. So what I use is one of these Twizzlers, and these really are, if you're going to be doing a lot of tapestry stitching, they just make your lives so much easier. So all I'm going to do is now just tighten. And I'm tightening it so that it's pulling the bolt fully the way into the wood on the reverse. I'll show you the difference. So you see here, on this side, here the bolt is sitting so it's protruding. On this side, the bolt's been pulled in so it's actually gone into the wood. So I'm just going to repeat that on all of the bolt corners. So I've now got these all really tight. Now my canvas is actually still a little bit loose. So what I'm going to do is now, once they're all tight, just loosen them a little tiny bit. And I'm just going to loosen actually this one side. And with that other side, it's absolutely locked tight. So I'm now going to pull this one in as hard as I can and then tighten these again. And you can see now my canvas is much tighter. That's how I want to work, that's how it's most satisfying, and that's how you're going to ensure that as you stitch, you maintain the tension of your piece. So that is the first step of the guide, and now we're just going to go on to talk through the contents of the kit. So the first design, I'm just going to show you all the contents of the kit for Sovereign of the Sea, because that's the kit I'm going to be using for most of the demo. So I've already shown you that what came in the kit was the canvas. Now this is the kit here. Let me show you what else comes in it. So we have our wool, all pre-cut, pre-hanked. We have a plan here. We've got an instruction booklet. And then we also have in this folder here a little hints and tip sheet. And then we've got in here our needles that we need to use. So that's everything we have. The bag is there so you can put everything in it when you finish stitching at the end of the day, and then you've got all your contents you need. So first up, let me show you these two instructions we've got here. So they're two different things. The first one is a large high resolution picture of the piece you're going to be stitching. Now, when it comes to the Woolies, these are very much free-form embroidery. And the reason we include this high-res picture is because we want you to be able to see the direction we've stitched in. So this is more than just a kind of, oh, look, here's what you're going to make. This is actually quite instructional, you'll find, to helping you know how to stitch the different areas of the design. And then next up, what you have here is you have a booklet which in this section here shows you the different stitch directions for the different areas. So everything that's in a light grey here is a horizontal stitch. Everything that's in a darker grey, we have this sort of diagonals that we're stitching in so you can see the different ways you need to stitch. And that aligns to what's going on here. So for example, I can see that all the sky here is this horizontal light grey, and when I look at the picture, all the sky is the light grey. I can see that all the sails are in this middle grey, and that means all the sails are in this stitch that way. So that's how you're going to use the two sections of the guide. Now on the reverse of the guide, we also have some instructions around the long stitch and a guide on how to stitch your woolly. Now this is the bit where I want you just to kind of read through it, but watching this video is really the most important thing to getting this process right. Okay, so you have those two elements. So through these two plans, you will know what direction you're going to be doing your stitches in. Now the other thing you need to know is what colour is going where in your stitches. So on your canvas, I've just got another one here for a demo, alongside the edge of the canvas you've got a little kind of guide of all your different colours. So you'll have 10 different colours here, and you'll have 10 colours of wool here which will match up. On the website, on each of the individual kit pages, there is a photo showing you the wool colours alongside this guide. So all you really need to do is go to the website, find that picture, and then you can put your wool, organise your wool alongside. So for example, I have number 1 here, number 2 is my dark, number 3 is my bright, and then I have a set of these murkier blues. So I've got number 4, I've got number 5, and I've got number 6. I've then got my lightest white, number 7. I've got my middle white, number 8. I've got my mauve colour, number 9. And I've got my yellow, number 10. Now we've tried to keep all the designs so actually the colours are pretty obvious what is what. There's enough difference between the colours for you to be able to identify them. If you want, when you're stitching, what you can then do is cut off a little segment of your canvas and just make yourself a little colour guide if that's useful. I don't find it's necessary because I very quickly become very familiar with what colour goes where, and likewise, because I have my handy sort of big picture, I can quite easily use this as my reference for, I know that even the canvas is printed with the colours, but I can also go to here and be like, okay, well that's the pale blue, that's the orange, that's the dark blue, that's the bright blue, this is the combination of the 3 murkier blues. You know, it's quite straightforward, and you're going to have that exact process, the same thing when it comes to Temerity, to Steadfast, and to the Bay of Biscay, so the other ones that are like this design, okay? So I've got all my wools like this. I'm organised with the wool, and I know what I'm doing. So that is how you're going to kind of, when you receive your kit, make sure before you begin, you're comfortable with how you're working with it. So if you're working on a frame, you're going to have mounted up your piece. You've got your 2 plans here. You've got your wool, and you're kind of organised with how you're using your wool. And then likewise, you've also got your needles that you're going to be using, which are in the bag. So what I'm just going to do now is quickly just show you the guides for the other 4 designs so you can see how those all work as well. And then I'm going to show you how to demo a little bit of the stitching. So I'm just going to show you now the other designs. So next up, I'm just going to show you Temerity, and this again, I'm just showing you the contents of the kit. So if this is the one you're doing, you have a guide on how you're doing it. So Temerity is a smaller piece. The canvas printed exactly the same way though. So you'd be mounting it up in the same way. And again, you've got your colour plan down the side with kind of a white and off-white. I'll show you the organisation of the colours, and then everything is printed within the design. I can then take a look here and see within this section, I have my colour plan of how I'm going to be stitching the different areas. So I know, say, all the palest grey again is going to be this horizontal stitch, all the middle grey is a vertical stitch, and then I have my 2 other greys are going to be my diagonal stitches. And so I can see that I've got a lighter grey here, which is my diagonal this way, and a darker grey, which is going to be diagonal going that way. So again, I've got my plan here, but what I really most want to refer to, again, is my picture. So here we have our high resolution image to show us how we're stitching. Now, one of the important things about the Woolies is we use varying lengths of stitches. We try to keep it fluid when we're stitching, but this is your useful guide of how I've done it when I've been stitching. And then finally, you've got your wool colours. So again, I can just have a look at my plan along the side and you'll find that it's pretty obvious what colour is what. So if I start from my bottom, I've got my kind of dark blue, that's my border. I've got my brown for my boat. I've got one orange, and then I've got 3 green colours here. And these greens are going from my darkest, number 5, through to my middle, number 4, and through to my palest. Then for numbers 1 and 2, I've got 2 whites. I've got a bright white and an off-white. So you see my colours are all pretty straightforward to organise. So I've got everything there I need for Temerity. If I was stitching this, I'd get it mounted up, and that's how we're going to stitch this one. Okay, same again. Let's look at Bay of Biscay this time. So I'm going to pull it out. I've got all my wool here. I've got my small plan, my large plan, and then I've got my canvas. So again, my canvas is printed up fully with the design. So you see this is a bigger piece, and I've got a colour plan down the left-hand side. So in my kit, I've got my poster. Again, a high-res image of the poster so that you can see the different stitching directions you're going to want to use across the piece. So you can see all the different stitching directions here. And then within this section here, we also have a printed plan to show you this. So you've got your palest grey where I'm going entirely horizontal. I've got my darkest grey for my diagonal stitches and my lighter middle grey for my vertical stitches, which all relates to this plan here. And then that's all, everything is printed onto the canvas. So let me organise the wool and just show you. And again, for all the wool organising, remember there's photos on the website which show you how to organise the wool. It shows you a picture of the colour guide alongside, so you know. So let me just open my wool up here. So I'm going to start from the top and work my way down. So I've got my dark grey of my outer border. Then I've got my palest orange, my middle orange, my darker one, and then I've got my brown. So that's number 4. I've then got my white and my next one, my off-white, I've got here. And then I go into my 3 greys. So I've got my pale grey, my middle grey, and my dark grey. And then we end on our 3 blues. I've got my light blue, my mid blue, and my dark blue. And again, if you find it easier, you can make yourself a colour plan to show you these. Just stitch a little, cut a little bit of your canvas off, stitch a bit of each colour, and then you'll remember. But believe me, when you start stitching, it's really obvious what colour goes where, and particularly when you start referring to the plan, you will find it's really obvious for you what colour is going where. So don't worry too much about it, okay? So that's the Bay of Biscay. That's how you're organising your materials from your set. And at the end, I'm going to then show you how to stitch your woolly. So I'm going to put this away and I'm just going to get the final one out to show you. Okay, so the final one, I'm just going to quickly show you the contents of Steadfast kit. So again, we have our canvas, all our wool, and then our 2 instruction booklets. So I have my canvas here, and then I've got my high-res picture. Again, you can then relate each section so you can actually see the stitched version, so you can see how the various bits are stitched. We've got a printed plan in here. Again, shows you, right, all of this area, everything in this light grey is being done horizontally. everything in this middle grey is being done vertically, and everything in this other one is being done diagonally. So that again shows you the stitches, but you can easily understand this from just looking at the picture. Again, we have a colour plan down the side, which has 9 colours along it. So we're going to start from the top. So we have our palest white, number 1. We have our off-white, number 2. Then we have our 2 kind of grey, browny colours. We've got a lighter brown one and a darker brown one. We've got pictures on the website again which show this. We've got our bright red, and then we've got our dark red, our dark grey, and then we've got our strong blue and our paler blue. So we've got our full colour plan there of all the different colours we're going to use. And then you're going to use this colour, the grey, on this design, Steadfast particularly. There's a lot of different ropes. At the end, I'm going to come on to how we add ropes, how we finish off the design. Okay, so I am back with Sovereign of the Sea. I'm going to demo for you on this one how to stitch your woolly. You're going to apply exactly this same methodology across all the designs. And the one thing I really want to highlight on how you stitch your woolly is these are based on an old 18th, 17th century technique, woolwork stitching, where you're using long stitches. It was always done by untrained, often fishermen or sailors when they were back in after long periods out at sea. They would work on these pieces. And this was not about precision. The actual character from these pieces comes from the fact you use a big variety of lengths of stitches, of directions of stitches. So there's an element of feeling the kind of artistry of your piece. So you want to almost, if you're stitching a sail, you want to make sure your stitch direction replicates the sail. But don't focus too heavily on technique here. This is not the sort of process like a typical tapestry where we're doing it all in tent stitch and we kind of need to stitch over every single hole. This is a lot freer. It's really enjoyable, and just aim for variety. There's no counting here. We're very much using the printed canvas as our guide. So that's why you'll find in this set, I don't have a gridded out plan as part of these, because that is not how you stitch this. We are not counting any of our stitches. We are just using long stitches. So I'm going to start here by showing you a bit of the border. I'm going to show you a little bit of the sea, and I'm going to show you a bit of the sail. And that will show you the different types of stitches. So when you're doing kind of ones where it's consistent, it's going to show you when you're doing ones with varying lengths. And then it's also going to show you how we go about stitching sails and doing a diagonal. So for the border, I've got my strong orange. I'm going to take a single strand of orange. And wrap my wool back up again. So I'm going to thread up my needle with my single strand. And I've got a large tapestry needle here. And then I'm going to tie a knot in the end. People have different approaches to how they choose to do tapestry. Some people put a knot somewhere at the front and then they work back kind of away from the knot. I'd like to say I'm going to do this in the simplest possible way, which is where I just use my knot at my starting point. I stitch all my woolies this way. It is the easiest way. This has so much volume on the back of these pieces. You don't need to worry about having knots on the back of your pieces. If this comment makes no sense to you, don't worry. That means you haven't already been tainted by all the rules of needlepoint. But just know that what I'm doing now will break some people's rules of needlepoint. If you don't like doing your knots in this way, that is totally fine. But this is how I want to do it, and it makes no difference to the finished piece. So I've got my needle threaded up and I've got a knot. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start in a random point along. I'm actually going to start up high, and I'm bringing my needle in from one side, and you're going to bring in from the hole. You're kind of working across the design, and you're going to want to cover the hole. So I'm going to start from here. And I'm basically just coming the whole way across the design. So I'm covering over that number of holes. I'm then going to go back next to where I began and go back down. You see, and I'm working up the design. Okay. Now you can cut down your lengths of wool, but we cut these in the Woolies kits longer than our other kits because you cover ground very quickly when you're stitching in this way. And so personally, I just find it easier to work with longer stretches because it means I don't have to rethread my needle too often. Now right at the beginning, you'll start seeing then what you start doing is you're getting this side-by-side stitches and you're getting really good canvas coverage because of the fact you've got a full stitch on the front and on the back. And that's why we're working in this looping way where our needle is always coming up next to where our last stitch finished, you know, in the same sort of vicinity. See, I'll just show you a bit more. And you see how simple this is. It's very much a colouring by numbers. Now when you're working and doing needlepoint stitching, you do not need to be super methodical about how you stitch. So I can stitch, say, this bit here, and if I wanted to, I could now skip up, skip back down to this area here. I could go do a few stitches over here. You know, I wouldn't worry about having to work in a really methodical way. It's a very forgiving technique. So just, if you're totally new to this, give yourself a little bit of time to play around with it and you'll very quickly see how easy it is. The best way to learn is just to get stuck in and then you'll get a feel for how simple this is. So I'm stitching like this. So I'm just going to keep going and work up towards the top. Now, as you stitch, you might have a moment where you kind of worry, oh, are there gaps? Am I seeing kind of gaps? Am I seeing bits of the canvas coming through? Believe me, don't worry about that because part of the thing is we have a volume layer on the back that when we actually mount up this bit of embroidery, all that back section gets pushed forward too, and it effectively fills in the gap, so you really don't see any gaps in the bits you've stitched. So I'm going to come to this corner and then I want to show you just how we make sure we have a look over at the colour plan. So I've got that section stitched. Now if I go to my pictures here, I can see when I get to the corner, it's calling for me to get a different stitching direction going. So I'm working horizontally up to the edge and then I'm going to work vertically through the corner. And I can also see that when I look at the picture. I can see I've got a diagonal line that's going through and that's just to create the look of a frame. So I'm just going to show you how I go about doing that. So when I get to the corner, I know I want to create this longer diagonal. I'm not too worried, as I said, about how precise I am with that. But I'm just going to bring each of my stitches from this point onwards in one. So I'm stitching exactly the same way. I'm just going to bring them in one so I get the kind of diagonal going across. So I've gone diagonal fully to the corner here, I've got to there. And then I'm just going to come back down again. So I'm going to work from the top and just work across into this hole. So you see, now I'm switching up my stitching direction and I'm going vertically. Now I'm going that way. I could easily just go from this side here, come up. I don't need to worry about the fact I'm kind of maintaining the same kind of where I'm stitching from what side to what side. That doesn't matter. All that matters is you keep working in this looping way. So pull this up. And so that's how I've gone about doing my change of direction. It's super simple, you see. There's nothing really here to kind of particularly worry about as you stitch. And then I carry on along this way. And if you're at all used to doing any kind of needlepoint, you'll see just doing this long stitch technique, how quickly you cover ground. This would take hours in kind of normal needlepoint to cover each hole. These ones just don't take that length of time at all. They're just so much quicker. So let me just do a little bit more. I'll show you then how to finish your thread. Okay, now I've got about this much left. All I'm going to do is flip my canvas over, and on the back I just want to secure my thread in place, pulling my needle through, wrapping it around a few times. Now I'm not too worried about how secure it is. I don't need to tie another knot, and that's partly because when I mount it all up, it's all going to lock everything in place, so I don't need to worry too much about that. So there you see, that's how we really begin, and that's how you work when you've got an area that's quite methodical. But this is exactly how you're going to stitch loads of sections. Like when you stitch kind of the lettering, it's all very obvious, kind of where the stitches start and finish feels very obvious. Likewise, on the body of the boat, it's very obvious like where the vertical stitches are. So I'm going to actually show you how to do this bit of the sky rather than the sea, because then you can also see how the stitches jut up against each other. I have got my palest blue here, and I'm going to get out a single stitch length again. Thread up my needle and tie a knot. So for this bit, let me just start in the top, and I'm just bringing my needle up in the same hole that my last stitch is finished, so I don't want a gap between sections. And I'm going to be working in a kind of horizontal stitches, again, but of varying lengths. So I'm just going to put a random stitch length in to begin with. And then I'm going to go back next to where I began and do a completely different length of stitch. And don't worry about how long these are. I would say I would go anything up to kind of 15 holes in length and anything down to 5 holes in length. Somewhere between 5 and 15. All you really care about is making it not feel too methodical, too repetitive, too organised. You know, you want it to feel loose and free, because that's kind of how they look most artistic as finished pieces. You don't want it to look like it's got really clear, strong lines. So you see I'm doing some really long ones, and then I'm also going to put some really short ones in. And again, I'm working in this kind of looping manner where I'm starting near where I finished. And I would probably work, usually when I'm filling a section, I find it easiest just to go the whole way down and then the whole way back up again, but you don't have to do it that way. So I'm currently just working down the line. So you can see I've probably got enough here. I'm going to then go back up towards the top. Now what I want to do is continue this varying stitch length. So I'm going to go up a bit here, some long stitches in, and then I'm working in a similar way where I'm looping it back, always starting kind of on the left-hand side, back across the right. And I'm just again putting in kind of random lengths of stitches. So I want it to feel loose, free, not too joined up, nothing too repetitive, some really short ones, keeping it unpredictable. This is, you really can't go wrong with these woolies. You know, the technique is super forgiving and it's again, unlike a lot of needlepoint, it's the sort of thing where you don't need to pay huge amounts of attention. We really are colouring in by numbers here. So this is the method you're going to use for any areas which have sort of blended in colours. And don't ever worry, if you ever miss a little square or something, then you can always just stitch over the top of something. So if I find that, that stitch, I missed a hole, I could go back in and I could just put a stitch over the top of it. No one would really notice in the finished piece. So don't worry about things like that. So you see I'm kind of going to go back down here and just jumping around, and I'm really not worried about how kind of organised I'm being. I'm just working in a way that I'm comfortable with, that feels kind of fun and enjoyable for me, where I'm not getting bored. And that is basically how we're going to take the approach of filling any of these areas where you've got blended lengths. So you can sort of see here, there's loads of different blended lengths. I don't need to work kind of in these areas in a structured way. Now, the only other area I want to then show you though is the sails, because on these 4 designs, we do the sails slightly differently. So on the back here, I'm just going to secure off my thread again, and you can see I've got a lot of volume on the back, and that volume is all going to help me when I mount it all up at the end. So and cut it off. So as I said, the one bit I do want to show you how to do is the sail, because the one thing about the sail is I want them to feel like they're billowing. I'm trying to replicate that feeling of kind of ships at sea. And so the way I think you're best to achieve that is actually by doubling up your strands of wool. So I've got my white wool here. If I'm stitching a large sail, then what I'd end up doing is getting 2 strands of wool and threading it through the needle. But here I'm just going to cut, because I know it's quite a short, small sail. I'm going to show you one. I'm going to cut one of my lengths down. I'm going to thread then 2 pieces of wool through my needle. And exactly as we've done before, I'm tying a knot. And by working with 2 strands, it just means we have the ability to create more of a sense of volume. You see, I've got a decent knot in the end, and I've got my 2 strands threaded up. So let me look at the picture again. A ever useful picture. I can see on the picture here that the stitches are going in this diagonal manner. And if I want, I can also take a look at this one here, and I can see it's in my darkest grey and it's going in this diagonal manner. So I can refer to both stitch plans. I think you'll find yourself just using this picture more than anything. So I'm going to work in that diagonal manner. It really doesn't matter where I begin. So I'm going to go straight to the centre. And when you do this, you'll find that it feels a little bit tighter as you're pulling the wool through. So I'm just going to go for the whole way across and just get one big long stitch in. Then I'm going to bring my needle up next to where it began. I'm going to work upwards. And these are going to feel super full. You know, you're going to feel like you've got a lot of wool on the surface. That's great. That's what we want. We want billowing, full sails. And you see with these long stitches just how quickly you stitch these areas. You can start seeing how these designs don't take the big pieces, but they actually don't take that long to make. Okay, I've got roughly that bit there. I'm going to come back down. And my double strands really does make a huge difference in the finished piece for just separating the sails from the kind of background of the sea. And so across all these 4 designs of the new collection of Woolies, you're going to use single strands for every area, but on all of them, you're going to end up using double strands on the sails. So that is it. You know, that's the basic technique there. I'm just going to, again, close off this, and just in a way where it feels secure. So I'm just going to wrap it round a couple of times. But that is how you stitch up these pieces. And just to give you a feel for what this looks like, here is the finished piece in front of me. So again, you can see on the finished piece here just how the difference of the texture of the 2. So for example, across this bit here, you can see this whole area I stitched has the kind of varying strands, then I've got the varying strands in the dark blue of the sea, but you can see this feels fuller because I've gone with 2 strands of thread on all of this section. So that's exactly how we stitch them, and they're really straightforward. Again, I just want you to kind of feel quite free. So once you've finished stitching your entire piece, that's when we go about adding some ropes into the designs. And we do that very much at the end. On certain designs, I haven't used many ropes. On other designs, I've used loads of ropes. I want you to feel free in how you choose to put ropes onto your design, whether you think it works or whether you don't think it works. All we're doing is we're just over stitching with long pieces of wool, and it's super simple. You know, once the whole design is done, all you're going to do is get a long piece of wool, bring your needle up, run along, stitch along. Again, on every single design, you're going to have a picture that shows you how I've chosen to put the ropes in. But please don't feel like you have to do it in the same way as me. By the time you get to that point, you will be so confident in how you're stitching your woolly that if you want to replicate what I've done, absolutely go for it. But if you want to have a bit more freedom, or you actually don't think the design needs ropes, because often ropes can be a bit distracting, then it's up to you. The one thing I would say is it's super simple adding them in. If you aren't sure, then take a look at Calypso and Nautilus. At the very end, there's a section there which shows me stitching in some ropes. You're going to use exactly the same method. So if you want to see the ropes being stitched, refer to the Calypso and Nautilus video and go to the end and you'll see that section. But if you do put them in, you can easily cut them back out again if you decide you're not that happy with it. So please, when it comes to ropes, just use a bit of your own kind of imagination with how you think you want to do it and whether you think it's necessary. Because, for example, on the Bay of Biscay and Temerity, I chose not to add any ropes, but you might think that's something you do want to have in your design and it could look wonderful with them. So please don't feel stuck to what I've done. So that is the Woolies. They're big pieces. They are super freeing pieces. And the key thing is just to let go in the process. Get started, and once you've got started, you'll very quickly see how easy they are to do. And I really hope you enjoy it. If you have questions, always send them our way, and we're always happy to help. And we can always record new bits of video if there's anything you particularly want to see. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy the kit.